The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Mr. Hakainde Hichilema, President of the Republic of Zambia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th Session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to begin by congratulating Your Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, on your election as President of the 76th Session of the United Nations General Assembly. I am confident that your wealth of knowledge and vast experience in multilateral issues will lead to a successful discharge of the important responsibilities of the Assembly throughout this session. Zambia stands to work with you as you execute your mandate in presiding over the matters of this session. To the outgoing President, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, I wish to convey Zambia's appreciation for your commendable service to the United Nations family during the 75th session. Mr. President, I have the distinct honor to deliver my maiden speech as the 7th President of the Republic of Zambia following the electoral victory of our United Party for National Development, UPND, in the presidential and general elections that were held on the 12th of August 2021. I am pleased to inform this august House that the people of Zambia, the Republic of the People of Zambia, once again rose to the occasion to usher in a new government through a peaceful election. This has enabled Zambia to further consolidate our democratic credentials, which serves as an inspiration to the African continent, where the outcome of our election was determined by those who vote and not those who count votes. Very important. We are therefore proud to provide leadership in our country where people aspire for a free and just society and where they aspire for their voices to be heard. Mr. President, we were able to achieve this political transformation even at a time when Zambia was grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic and in the midst of deep sorrow following the passing on of our founding father and first Republican President, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda. I therefore wish to take this opportunity on behalf of the people of Zambia to pay tribute to this icon leader who was fondly known in our country and elsewhere as KK. It is without doubt that the last remaining stalwart of liberation struggles has left an indelible mark on humanity. Dr. Kaunda's principles, values, contributions towards the ideals of emancipation and independence did not only spread across the African continent, but across the entire globe. His untold devotion to peace and unity laid the very foundation for Zambia's stature as a beacon of peace, not only in Southern Africa, but on the African continent as a whole. The Zambian government will therefore build upon KK's profound legacy to live in peace and harmony with one another. As we work towards this year's theme, let us remember the important lessons that Dr. Kaunda taught us, especially as we work towards revitalizing the UN system. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a far-reaching social-economic impact globally, including disturbing trade flows, supply chains, and various economic activities on our continent in the world. In addition to loss of lives, the pandemic increased poverty levels through job losses, stressed healthcare systems, and worse still, the delivery of education to learners. Disruption to the education systems, particularly in developing countries, was in part due to inadequate information, communication, and technology, ICT facilities within our countries. In response to the pandemic, Zambia has developed a national preparedness and response plan for COVID-19, which has been used to guide the implementation of mitigation measures for the pandemic. The vaccine program forms an integral part of the response plan in our country. Despite our placing the vaccine program high on the list of mitigation measures, Zambia has only managed to vaccinate a mere 3% of its population. This is against the country's target of vaccinating 70% of the eligible population by the third quarter 2022. This clearly highlights the inequitable access to vaccines developing countries, especially that more than 2 billion vaccines have been administered worldwide. Mr. President, it is fair to state that recovery from the pandemic hinges upon mass vaccinations before considering other reforms or facilities that tend to fail when countries lock down their economies. It is therefore gratifying that this session of the General Assembly will consider building on initiatives such as the African Vaccine Acquisition Acquisition Trust for COVID-19, AVAT, and COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access, COVAX. The two initiatives have made it possible for low-income countries, such as our own, Zambia, to access life-saving vaccines which will contribute to building resilience and recovery from the pandemic. I wish, therefore, to express Zambia's appreciation for the support that has been provided thus far through the COVAX and AVAT facilities. The UN system and various stakeholders have benefited from. To further guarantee resilience, we call for the concerted and enhanced global efforts towards promoting investments, particularly in local manufacturing capacity and technology transfer on vaccines, related infrastructure, human capital, as well as research and development, R&D. Mr. President, the new administration in Zambia is cognizant that a conducive governance environment is a precursor for the country's political stability, security, economic growth, and sustainable development. It also fosters enhanced transparency, accountability, and consultative dialogue. Very important. With this realization, our administration will work towards strengthening of oversight, governance institutions, and ensure the independence and autonomy of the three arms of government, particularly the legislature and the judiciary. The fight against corruption will be at the center of our transformation agenda, and this shall be expected to be executed with zero tolerance to corruption. Zero tolerance to corruption. We shall also promote free media and an active civil society, as they are critical in upholding checks and balances, human rights, liberties, and freedoms. Mr. President, my government's high priority is to restore macroeconomic stability, attain fiscal and debt sustainability, promote economic growth, enhance economic diversification, and manage the contraction of debt. I am confident that these measures will restore macroeconomic stability and put the country back on economic recovery. To sustain this growth, Zambia will dedicate efforts to guarantee a stable and predictable environment that will attract and protect local, regional, and foreign direct investment, as well as enhance local participation in our economy. Very important. This is a prerequisite for a vibrant private sector-led economy, and thus create jobs and opportunities for all our people. Mr. President, to complement these efforts, Zambia has embarked on an ambitious economic and social transformation agenda with a view to creating equitable opportunities and poverty reduction for the Zambian people, especially the youth and the women who actually delivered our election victory in our country. In order to achieve this goal, our administration shall design and implement interventions aimed at inducing enhanced productivity in agriculture, mining, energy, financial services, tourism, technology, health, and education, as well as support the growth of micro, small, and medium enterprises. Despite these well-thought-out interventions, today's world economy is more complex than ever before. Given the numerous global concerns, including pandemics, climate change, and indeed illegal human migration, it is imperative that we adapt to these effects of globalization by fostering key partnerships and deepening integration at all levels, so to say. This is critical to ensure that we realize our aspirations of restoring Zambia on a path to sustainable economic growth and development. Mr. President, Zambia is aware of the critical role of the United Nations in guiding the world to focus on the Sustainable Development Agenda. In particular, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has set the tone and benchmarks for countries to incorporate sustainability in their development policies. Our New Dawn government in Zambia is committed to realizing tangible growth and sustainable development while paying particular attention so that this is not achieved at the expense of future generations. Like many other developing countries, Zambia calls for closer cooperation and support for capacity to adopt better, safer, climate change sensitive, and modern methods of increased production and productivity. Our administration has established a ministry that is the first of its kind in Zambia, the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment. To address this, among other important issues concerning environmental sustainability, it became important for us to establish this new ministry. This will be crucial to build the ability for implementing climate-positive actions in our country. Mr. President, I'm drawn to the prophetic inscription on the wall of the United Nations Plaza, and I quote, "They shall beat their swords to plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Isaiah 2, verses 4 to 5, end of quote. These words, Mr. President, serve as a reminder to the United Nations to work towards global peace and international cooperation. Though we have made leaps and bounds in the area of peace, security, and stability, there remains pockets of conflict in many regions of the world where guns have not been silenced up to now. The silencing of guns, therefore, goes beyond addressing conventional warfare, but also in addressing new emerging threats of our century, which include challenges of extremism and international terrorism, cybercrime, asymmetric warfare, proliferation of non-conventional weapons, and organized crime. As an international community, we need to continue to work together to address the root cause of these global threats through various national, regional, and global mechanisms. Mr. President, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, the late Dr. Kofi Annan, laid out an ambitious agenda before the 60th General Assembly, which is still prominent or pertinent today. In his report, In Larger Freedom Towards Development, Security, and Human Rights for All, he made the case that development, security, and respect for human rights cannot be enjoyed in the absence of the other. These are indispensable realities of a well-functioning nation and international system. I, however, wish to go a step further, Mr. President, in asserting that the foundation to sustainable economic growth and development is peace and stability. Without peace and harmony, development cannot be attained. Zambia will therefore continue to support national, regional, and international initiatives aimed at promoting security, peace, and stability. In this vein, Zambia reaffirms its commitment to play an active role in the SADC mission in Mozambique aimed at restoring peace to the Cabo Delgado province of our country, In addition, Zambia remains committed to the cause of the Lusaka Master Roadmap to silence guns in Africa, an initiative being implemented by all African Union AU member states to promote peace and security, which has since been endorsed for extension for a further 10-year period from 2021 to 2030. We therefore wish to call for continued support of the United Nations in silencing guns in Africa and other continental initiatives. Mr. President, in the quest for promoting global peace and stability, security, Zambia notes with satisfaction the entry into force of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, which became operative on the 22nd January 2021. The entry into force of the TPNW is a tangible feat towards advancing the cause of nuclear disarmament on the international stage. Zambia encourages other states that are yet to ratify the TPNW to come on board so that we can continue making advances towards achieving our aspirations of eradicating nuclear weapons on our continent. On the United Nations Security Council, UNSC reform, Zambia is still concerned with the slow pace of negotiations which have continued without making much progress. Zambia, in this regard, wishes to reiterate the African Common Position, the Ezulwini Consensus, that calls for a more representative and democratic United Nations Security Council, in which Africa, like all other world regions, will be fairly represented on this body. Mr. President, the call for gender equality is now a century-old struggle for women to participate equally with men in society as a whole. Despite realization that women's full and effective participation in all areas of life results in prosperity, women are still, however, involved less in public life and decision-making. It is important that we continue to demand for the promotion of gender equality while paying particular attention to the rights of women, children, girls included in there, and the rights of people living with disabilities. For us in Zambia, we will remain committed to the advancement and promotion of women's rights, and for the first time, Mr. President, in the history of our country, our new parliament has elected the first female Speaker of the National Assembly to preside over Zambia's supreme law-making organ of our government. I further wish to state, and I think this is important, with pride, that Zambia's Vice President, Republican Vice President, as well as the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly are both women in our country. We're very proud of that. Consistent with our commitment, Zambia is implementing various initiatives designed to harmonize the development, programming, and indeed implementation of economic empowerment efforts targeting women and the youth across the country. In doing all of this, our aim is to eliminate hunger and rural poverty. As we know, these vices are said to have the face of women and children. Further, Zambia emphasizes the importance of ensuring that communities have women at every level of decision-making, as doing so will translate into a discourse that will be inclusive, representative, and thus more holistic and insightful. Our government will focus on increasing support for women through creation of employment opportunities and entrepreneurship programs, amongst others. We will also focus on increasing access to secondary education for adolescent girls from impoverished households through financial aid and grant schemes. Mr. President, I wish to stress that the government of the Republic of Zambia will remain committed to economic diplomacy and multilateralism, to consolidate global efforts through promoting open and cordial relations with the international community in order to ensure collective sustainable growth and development in our country. Mr. President, as I conclude, I wish to emphasize that it is the duty and indeed responsibility of all of us in the global democratic community to make democracy work for all our people. We can't do this by delivering democracy dividends through accelerating economic development, balanced distribution of resources and among our people, and our people accessing opportunities for a better life. This is what will make democracy attractive to our people in our individual countries. This is what will make democracy sustainable and keep away autocratic and heavy-handed alternatives from leadership in our countries. It's very important. This is what will foster a peaceful, prosperous, and more united world. Mr. President, heads of government, state, I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I want to thank the President of the Republic of Zambia for the statement that he has just pronounced. I would like to ask protocol to escort His Excellency.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, I congratulate you warmly on your assumption of office as President of the General Assembly, the Assembly of Humanity, and wish you well in the management of our affairs. I congratulate also the Secretary General on his unanimous re-election for a second term. The common agenda that he has outlined provides us with a powerful framework within which to tackle effectively global issues in these first decades of the 21st century. The presence here in New York of 102 leaders of nations in this 76th session tells us of our resolve to return the world to normalcy. We're not there yet, but we're making considerable progress. Back in 2017, when I made my first appearance at the General Assembly as the newly elected President of Ghana, I said neither Ghana nor Africa wanted to be scars on anybody's conscience. I said we want to build economies that are not dependent on charity and handouts, because long and bitter experiences have taught us that no matter how generous the charity, we would remain poor. Between 2017 to 2020, Ghana recorded an average growth rate of 7%, amongst the highest in the world. In 2020, when the global economy in sub-Saharan Africa has contracted by 3.5% and 2.1% respectively, Ghana was one of the few countries that produced a positive growth rate. This is a testament to our determination to build a Ghana beyond aid. 1 year on, although infection rates and deaths are relatively lower in the region, the virus's impact on economies and livelihoods has been damaging. The latest numbers from the African Development Bank indicate that African economies, which contracted by 2.1% in 2020, are yet to return to pre-pandemic levels. More than 30 million Africans fell into extreme poverty in 2020, and nearly 40 million could do so in 2021. The social impact has been devastating. Over 103 million African jobs have been lost. Women, who account for 40% of total employment, have been most hard hit. Mr. President, we're listening to the scientists. It is evident that vaccination is the way to protect populations and revitalize societies. To vaccinate 70% in the shortest possible time, as is being done elsewhere in the world, means some 900 million Africans have to be vaccinated. The Afro-Exim Bank structuring of the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Force $2 billion acquisition of 400 million Johnson & Johnson vaccines is part of the historic African Union's COVID-19 vaccine development and access strategy. It is a critical milestone in our collective fight against the pandemic, in a continent suffering the worst brunt of vaccine nationalism. The Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Force vaccine program, partly manufactured in South Africa, is the single largest and most far-reaching trade transaction since the entry into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area in January this year. It is eloquent testimony to the benefits of domestic production and pooled procurement in Africa, as envisaged by the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Ghana agrees with the call of the Rome Declaration of Global Health for voluntary licensing and technology transfers to boost vaccine production. The African Union is working with WHO, WTO, and other global partners to expand its vaccine manufacturing and deployment. We in Ghana have so far received 5 million doses, which have been administered to frontline health workers and those classified as being most at risk. 5 million is not a figure to be sneered at, particularly when we consider the situation in many other African countries. We're grateful that our efforts in the management of the pandemic and vaccine distribution have been recognized, and we have received these amounts so far. We're still hoping to vaccinate 20 million of our people by the end of the year. One unfortunate development appears to be the recent measures on entry into some countries in Europe, which suggests that Covishield, the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine manufactured in India, is not recognized by these countries. What is intriguing is the fact that this vaccine was donated to African countries through the COVAX facility. The use of vaccines as a tool for immigration control will be a truly retrogressive step. Mr. President, the last time there was such an upheaval in the world was during the Second World War, which led to the establishment of a new world order. This organization, the United Nations, and the other Bretton Woods institutions were created to maintain international peace and security, help rebuild the shattered post-war economy, and promote global economic cooperation. Even before the pandemic outbreak, many had concluded that the current structure of global economic cooperation, designed some 77 years ago, has proven inadequate to finance infrastructure and economic transformation in developing countries. Given the incapacity of the global financial system to produce the necessary outcomes to finance sustainable development, we need a constructive review. COVID-19 provides a great chance to rethink global economic cooperation based on the principles of mutuality, equity, sustainability, and collective prosperity envisaged by the SDGs. There is no question but that if the famous gathering in San Francisco was to take place today, it would be a significantly different United Nations Charter that would be written. In much the same way, a World Bank or IMF or WHO that is born today would be radically different institutions from those that were set up after the World War, as many of the countries in today's world, especially in Africa and the Caribbean, were not present in San Francisco. The pandemic has also shown us that the great advances in science and technology notwithstanding, we still have a lot to learn and discover about the human body and about life. Thus far, in spite of the grisly predictions of dead bodies littering the streets of Africa, and in spite of not having as much access to vaccine as the developed world, Africa seems mercifully to have escaped the worst of the COVID death rates. And for that, we thank God. Ghana wants to share a few thoughts which we believe should form the basis for the new global cooperation. Firstly, we need to strengthen the funding of the existing global health organizations. This must include a greater, more predictable base of multilateral funding for WHO and regional centers of disease controls, which play the central roles in global health security. It will require dedicating an additional 1% of GDP to funding global health. This is an investment in a global public aid goal, not aid. Secondly, we must develop more resilient finances to build back better and for future preparedness. Across the African continent, revenues have decreased by as much as 150 billion United States dollars, as economies are still reeling from the economic impact of the pandemic. African governments have already spent scarce reserves fighting the pandemic and providing social protection to millions of affected households. Ghana has been advocating that innovative financing must also address structural challenges beyond responding to immediate fiscal needs by providing mechanisms to facilitate investments in health infrastructure, technology, the environment, and people that would bolster resilience and equitable recovery. The IMF's unprecedented $650 billion United States SDR allocation offers a unique opportunity to provide additional financial resources to address the vast and surging inequities the pandemic has revealed and a crisis to come. Africa's allocation is some 33 billion United States dollars. If ever there was a time for an African Marshall Plan, it is now. The SDR infusion should be seized upon as a catalytic effort to leapfrog Africa to the next level of human development and ensure sustained global prosperity. African leaders have advocated for a prudent and transparent channeling of 25 to 35% of SDRs, that is $160 to $230 billion, from wealthier to vulnerable countries, $100 billion of which should be dedicated to Africa. We welcome the support of the European countries represented at the Africa Summit in France, the IMF, the G7 and G20, to some SDR redistribution. Mr. President, proceeds of channeled SDR should fund vaccine acquisition and manufacturing, climate and green investments, and a Pan-African stability mechanism, like the European Stability Mechanism, that will safeguard financial stability on the continent. A part of the redistribution should also help fund the recapitalization of the African Development Bank and Afri-Exim Bank to support industrialization, private sector job creation, and the African Continental Free Trade Initiative. Thirdly, we must reposition key multilateral organizations and international financial institutions such as the United Nations, the other Bretton Woods institutions, and the G20 to reflect inclusiveness, support country investments in global public goods, and ensure fast-track financial support to build back better and prepare for future pandemics. For instance, the key to the G20's effectiveness is that it achieves representative coverage of the global population and economy with a diversified enough number of leaders at the table to enable speed and flexibility in deliberation and decision-making. Admitting the African Union to an expanded G21 would have the same galvanizing effect within Africa that the EU's participation in the G20 has within Europe, strengthening policy coordination and coherence across the 54 African economies. With the African Union at the table, the group suddenly would have representation for 54 more countries, 1.3 billion more people, and 2.3 trillion more output. This extraordinary increase in representation will add just one seat to the table and about 10 minutes to the discussion. However, it will redefine global policy coordination to enable a more prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable world to emerge. Fourthly, we in Africa are as committed as any to the fight against climate change. We believe, however, that the fight is better advanced if we're able to maintain the crucial balance between economic, political, and environmental imperatives, positions that we will be articulating in Glasgow at the COP26 conference, which should form part of the new global compact. Lastly, now more than ever, we must defend democracy, constitutional rule, and human rights in the world. In the last 24 months, we've witnessed assaults on democracy around the world, sometimes even in developed countries where we had assumed that a consensus on the democratic form of governance had been established. Mr. President, in West Africa, recent events in Mali and Guinea have undermined democratic governance in our region. ECOWAS, the regional body whose authority I have the honor to be the current chair, is unreservedly committed to maintaining democratic governance in the ECOWAS community. That is why both Guinea and Mali, foundation members of the community, have been suspended from its organization pending the restoration of democratic governance. We welcome the support of the United Nations for the measures taken. ECOWAS has given Guinea 6 months to do so and requested the immediate release of President Alpha Condé. On my visit to Conakry last Friday, the military leaders indicated their willingness to see to his imminent release, and it is our hope that they will keep to their word. The authority has also made it clear to the military government in Mali that it is not prepared to negotiate an extension to the February deadline for the holding of democratic elections, as the essential steps to be taken can, with political will, be effected within the ECOWAS-sanctioned timetable. It is better that a government with a democratic mandate be in place as soon as possible to implement the necessary reforms for the future stability and growth of Mali, thereby enhancing capacity for the all-important fight against terrorism in Mali and in the wider Sahel. We in Ghana highly resolve that we will continue to defend democracy and constitutional rule and uphold human rights. We shall work to strengthen the institutions that support democracy in our country and in our region. We shall continue to support the United Nations and other international organizations to help remind us that indeed, no man is an island entire of itself. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Ghana for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
The Assembly will hear an address by Our Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania. I request protocol to escort Our Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations Our Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and to invite her to address the Assembly.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me commence by joining previous speakers in applauding you, Mr. President, for being elected to preside over the 76th session of this August Assembly, and for the exemplary manner in which you have been presiding over this session. I also commend you for the able manner in which you mastered to make possible for us to meet physically, despite unprecedented circumstances brought by COVID-19 pandemic. The holding of physical general debate this year, albeit with limitations, demonstrates again that humanity and multilateralism cannot and should not succumb to the virus. And thus, where there is a will, there is a way. This spirit is what we need going forward. It is why I support and subscribe to the theme of this 76th session that call all of us to build resilience through hope, to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the lives of the people, and revitalize the United Nations. Mr. President, this is my maiden speech at the United Nations General Assembly. Allow me, on behalf of the people and the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, to thank all members of the United Nations for your condolence message extended to our nation following the untimely passing of our late President, Dr. John Pombe Magufuli, on 17th March this year. May his soul continue to rest in eternal peace. We remain indebted to you for the thoughtful of comforting messages which helped us to prevail over that in unprecedented test to our nationhood. It is in the same vein that I thank the outgoing President of the 75th session for dedicating a slot on the 59th plenary meeting of the General Assembly on 16th of April 2021 to pay tribute to our beloved late President, Dr. Magufuli. Indeed, this was a gesture of solidarity and brotherhood. Mr. President, it is not by sheer coincidence that I chose to attend the United Nations General Assembly as my first trip outside Africa since I took the office. I did so out of my deep sense of conviction and faith in multilateralism in solving multitude of challenges that our world faces today. I'm here to assure you that under my stewardship, Tanzania will remain a formidable member of the United Nations and a dependable supporter of multilateralism. We'll keep our arms open to those who embrace us and engage with us. We'll continue to be Tanzania that you have known and relied on, a Tanzania that peacefully and respectfully coexisted and cooperated with all countries, big or small, mighty or weak, rich or poor, to make this world, our world, a better place for all of us. Mr. President, COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us how vulnerable we are as individual countries, regardless of our size, wealth, or geography. As we meet here today, we have less than a decade ahead to meet our collective commitment to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I note with great regret that according to the Sustainable Development Goals report of 2020, right now, the world is not on track to achieve the 2030 agenda, mainly due to adverse impact of COVID-19. The report further shows that in some areas, this pandemic has even reversed the progress that was already achieved years back. For instance, it is expected that around 71 million people who got out of extreme poverty will be pushed back into that situation because of this pandemic. What is depressing is the fact that these impacts are not felt evenly. We in the developing world are the most affected. It is therefore imperative that concerted efforts are undertaken to address this devastating situation. Mr. President, developing nations must be assisted in addressing socioeconomic impact of out of COVID-19. On this note, we are thankful to multilateral financial institutions for their efforts in saving many economies from collapsing. These kinds of interventions are important. We cannot afford to take refuge on the onset of COVID-19 as an excuse for not making sufficient progress on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. President, Tanzania has not been spared by COVID-19. After the onset of the pandemic, we in Tanzania, and I believe in many other developing countries, were stuck in the twilight of protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. Measures advocated by the World Health Organization were geared towards protecting lives. However, in an economy like Tanzania, consisting of a bigger proportion of people living on subsistence economy, whom we need to keep them afloat, my country therefore adopted all necessary measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, including joining the COVAX facility to ensure that Tanzania gain access to the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccination campaign has started in July this year with the most vulnerable communities and later on other age groupings. Mr. President, globally, when COVID-19 vaccines were being developed, some of us were hopeful that this would mean something good to all of humanity. Nevertheless, we have come to learn that the virus is moving faster than the global production of distribution of vaccines. And the vast majority of vaccines have been administered in high and upper middle income countries. With the current pace, it is less likely that we'll meet the WHO threshold of vaccinating at least 40% of people in every country by end of 2021, and at least 70% by the first half of 2022. The level of vaccine inequity that we see is appalling. It is truly disheartening to see that whilst most of our countries have inoculated less than 2% of our populace and thus seek more vaccines for our people, other countries are about to roll out the third dose, calling it booster vaccine. We tend to forget that nobody is safe until everyone is safe. It is indispensable that countries with surplus COVID vaccine doses share them with other countries. On another note, it is our humble request that the patent rights on COVID-19 vaccines should be waived for developing countries so that they can afford to produce the vaccines. This is not only a necessary move to end this pandemic, but also the right thing to do in order to save humanity. Mr. President, on economic fronts, the United Republic of Tanzania, like other countries, has not been spared by the effects of the COVID-19. Before the pandemic, our economy was growing at the steady rate of 6.9% compared to the current growth rate estimated at 5.4%. We are now embarking on reviving the tourism sector, which was badly affected because of travel restrictions put in many countries as means to curb the spread of COVID-19. While slowly trying to revive most economic activities suffocated by the pandemic, the government continues to work hard to improve the business environment and attract more investment. Aware of the nexus between economic growth and governance, we managed to maintain peace and political stability with a vibrant democracy and institutionalized good governance practices, upholding rule of law and human rights. Mr. President, I wish to take note of the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, which raises key issues of our common concern, such as gender equality, climate change, and youth development. On gender equality, COVID-19 is threatening to roll back the gains which we have made. As the first female president in the history of my country, the burden of expectation to deliver gender equality is heavier on my shoulders. It is for this reason that I commend the initiative by the UN Women, France and Mexico to organize the Generation Equality Forum that took place in Paris in June this year, whereby my country volunteered to champion for women's economic rights and justice. Aware that being passionate about gender equality is not sufficient, my government is reviewing policy and legal frameworks in order to come up with actionable and measurable plans to ensure economic empowerment of women, but also other aspects pertaining to gender equality and gender parity. We are also working on designing and implementation gender-responsive macroeconomic plans, budget reforms, and stimulus packages with the objective of reducing the number of women and girls living in poverty. Mr. President, the challenges of climate change are really affecting livelihoods, peace and security, and forceful displacement of our people. Tanzania government spends 2 to 3% of GDP to mitigate and build resilience of communities. And this is a lot in a country which is still grappling with poverty coupled with the emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has compromised our capacity to respond to harmful impact of climate change. Therefore, our actions today determine the future of our planet in terms of climate change. And in this regard, I call for transparent modality for financial disbursement and emphasize that developed countries should fulfill their commitment to contribute $100 billion annually by 2025 so as to facilitate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, in conclusion, I wish to echo my country's commitment in pursuing the principles of multilateralism as enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. I I urge other nations to continue supporting this august institution. The onset of COVID-19 has given to all of us a lesson that we are deeply intertwined and that unilateralism will not get us anywhere when it comes to challenges that transcends our national boundaries. A wise person once said, and I quote, "Alone, one will go faster, but together we'll go far. Multilateralism must always prevail." Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United Republic of Tanzania for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa to introduce an address by the head of state.
Mr. President, Secretary General, Excellencies, it's my honor and privilege to introduce the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa, to present South Africa's national statement for this general debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I thank you, Mr. President.
President of the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, colleagues and friends. We join today's General Assembly debate from around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has forever changed the nature of multilateral engagement, of diplomacy, of business, and of basic human interaction. And yet, even as we are separated by the expanses of geography and distance, the noble ideals of fellowship, solidarity, and cooperation stand firm. They are the bedrock on which the United Nations was formed 76 years ago, and they have been our guide as we confront the worst global health emergency in over a century. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused great devastation around the world. Millions of lives have been lost and livelihoods have been destroyed. It has shaken our sense of well-being and security. Yet the strong bonds of solidarity between nations have enabled us to overcome great challenges. It was through multilateral solidarity, support and cooperation between member states that countries in need were able to access medical equipment and supplies. In dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, it is generally agreed that vaccines are the greatest defense that humanity has against the ravages of this pandemic. It is therefore a great concern that the global community has not sustained the principles of solidarity and cooperation in securing equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. It is an indictment on humanity that more than 82% of the world's vaccine doses have been acquired by wealthy countries, while less than 1% has gone to low-income countries. Unless we address this as a matter of urgency, the pandemic will last much longer and new mutations of the virus will emerge and spread. South Africa reaffirms its call for fair and equitable distribution of vaccines. We urge all member states to support the proposal for a temporary waiver of certain provisions of the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights to allow more countries, particularly low and middle income countries, to produce COVID-19 vaccines. In this interconnected world, no country is safe until every country is safe. We need to prepare now for future pandemics and work with greater determination towards the goal of universal health coverage. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we must increase investment towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by providing low-income countries with the means of implementation. In this respect, the G20 Debt Standstill initiative is a welcome response to the fiscal and liquidity challenges faced by least developed economies. The agreement on the allocation of $650 billion in special drawing rights is significant, but it is insufficient to meet the extent of the enormous need. South Africa therefore reiterates its call for 25% of the total allocation, amounting to around $165 billion, to be made available to the African continent. Mr. President, climate change is an existential crisis for the entire world, yet poor countries are particularly vulnerable. Although we bear the least responsibility for causing climate change, African countries are among those that carry the greatest burden and cost. For the forthcoming COP26 in Glasgow, to respond adequately to the crisis we face, we need to see greater ambition and progress on mitigation, adaptation, and the means of implementation. COP26 must therefore launch a formal program of work on the implementation of the global goal on adaptation. The pandemic has been a stark reminder of our mutual dependency and that instability in one region of the world inevitably impacts its neighbors. That is why we seek to enhance the relationship between the UN and the African Union in maintaining peace, financing peace-building efforts, and advancing post-conflict reconstruction and development. South Africa continues with its efforts to contribute to international peace and security through our membership of the Peace-Building Commission and our continued engagement in UN peacekeeping. The right of the Palestinian people to self-determination has been raised in this assembly for almost as long as this body has been in existence. We raise it again today, not because we are bound by practice to do so, but because we resolutely believe that there shall be no peace and no justice until the Palestinian people are free from occupation and are able to exercise the rights for which this United Nations stands for. We have a responsibility as the nations of the world to spare no effort in finding a just, lasting, and peaceful solution, one that is based on internationally agreed parameters enshrined in the relevant UN resolutions. We reiterate our position that the people of Western Sahara have the right to self-determination in line with the relevant African Union decisions and UN Security Council resolutions. South Africa further affirms its solidarity with the Cuban people and calls for the lifting of economic embargo that has caused untold damage to the country's economy and people. Mr. President, this year marks 12 years since the start of the intergovernmental negotiations process and 16 years since the World Summit of 2005, where world leaders unanimously agreed on early reform of the Security Council. We have not honored this undertaking. South Africa reiterates its call for urgent reform and for a move to text-based negotiations through which an agreement can ultimately be reached. We must address the underrepresentation of the African continent in the UN system and ensure that the voice of the African continent, wherein 1.3 billion people reside, and the global South in general is strengthened in the multilateral system. Concurrent with achieving equitable geographical representation in the UN, we must also address the question of gender parity. Yesterday, we marked the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action at the World Conference Against Racism that was held in South Africa. This remains the international community's blueprint for action to fight racism and other forms of intolerance. We are bound by a common responsibility to fight both the legacy of past racism and the manifestation of racism in the present. Racism, like sexism, like xenophobia, like homophobia, demeans all of us. It undermines our humanity and stifles our efforts to build a world that is rooted in tolerance, in respect, and in human rights. We must use this anniversary to renew our commitment to combating racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances wherever they are found. Mr. President, the challenges we face are immense. We have to drive the global economic recovery. We have to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women. We have to address climate change, maintain peace and security, and protect society's most marginalized. Above all, we must close the wounds of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment that are preventing societies from realizing their full potential. This can only be done within the framework of a revitalized and reformed multilateral system with a strong and capable United Nations at its center. At this defining moment, this General Assembly of the nations of the world is once again called upon to inspire, to guide, and to lead. The United Nations stands as a beacon of hope for all who dream of a better world. Let us together, with the United Nations as our instrument, write a new history for humankind, one of equality, freedom, fundamental rights, and shared prosperity for all, leaving no one behind. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of South Africa for the statement just made.